What could you possibly plant in July in a hot climate? It's time to stop gardening, right? Have you lost your mind? Perhaps this July Grow Guide will offer some reassurance one way or the other. Besides what you can plant now, I want to discuss why you should keep growing, the value of cover crops, and how you can grow for joy. I'm Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. When it comes to fall gardening in Central Texas, it's really just an extension of summer gardening, because if you're not from this area, what you need to know is that it's not truly going to cool down until maybe late November or in the month of December. Oftentimes, we're pushing daytime highs in the 80s up until New Year's Eve. But we do have a great opportunity to grow some food in our backyards, and our options are going to be very similar to those that we can start off with this spring during the months of March and April. The primary fruiting crops that we can transplant out into our garden during the month of July are eggplant, pepper, and tomatoes. And you really want to get a jump on this and get some healthy transplants from a local nursery. Otherwise, you will have wanted to start those seedlings indoors probably sometime in the month of June. They're going to take about 8 weeks roughly to get to the size that they're ready to plant out in the garden. And this will correspond to a fall harvest. I would hope for that harvest to begin sometime in September or October when the temperatures start to break a little bit for us. Another option that you could consider if you're already growing those crops and they've done well up until this point, but maybe they're starting to wane in their production, as long as they are disease-free and looking healthy, you can consider cutting them back. And you want to do this by about 50%, maybe 75% in terms of tomatoes if they're an indeterminate variety and they're just growing wild. After you cut them back, you want to give them a nice side dressing of an organic fertilizer or some compost, something to give them some nutrients to grow back from. And if you can do that, you'll be taking advantage of a well-established root system and some plants that are going to be more vigorous growing into this time of year. And in addition to those that I just mentioned, there are many herbs that you can plant in your garden, and that's a lot of fun to do. Basil is one that's really tough, and it's going to keep on growing up until the first frost. But you can also consider some of the Mediterranean herbs such as oregano, thyme, sage, marjoram. Chives will do really well in the right spot. Here's a list of a few other of my favorites that you may be able to find at local nurseries this time of year. Otherwise, you want to plan ahead, get some seeds, and start those ahead of time. Along with that, there are several things that you can plant from seed directly out in your garden this time of year. Number one would be the warm season greens such as Malokia. This one is also known as Egyptian spinach. It's probably one of my all-time favorites, and this one will grow all summer long, and it doesn't really need shade cloth or a lot of care. It's highly nutritious. Others to consider would be amaranth varieties, specifically callaloo. This is one that's popular in the Caribbean. It's got a really large green leaf, pretty tasty in my opinion. But there are other varieties of edible leaf amaranth, such as the red-leafed amaranth. This one is really beautiful, especially if you flip that leaf over. It's just got a beautiful color. And these are pretty tasty in my opinion. The amaranth varieties, in my experience, do tend to go to seed a bit faster, but you can succession plant them and get a constant supply of these greens. Another one that you might consider would be Malabar spinach. It's not a true spinach. It needs a trellis or a pole to grow on. This one has a pretty thick leaf, very mucilaginous in nature. That's why it takes the heat so well. So you want to taste these a little bit if you can. Find your neighbor's garden, a community garden, somewhere where you can get your hands on them and decide if they are suitable to your palate. Otherwise, just go out on a limb. This is an adventure, and these are climate-adapted crops that can feed you this time of year. So I think that's a really relevant point of view. Outside of those leafy greens, you can look at some more fruiting crops, but you can plant these directly from seed, such as okra, southern peas, and yardlong beans. Now, these are all some of my absolute favorite things to grow in the garden through the summer. And if you plant them now in the month of July, they're going to do well. They're going to take off once we get into the time of year when the days start to get a little bit shorter, we get a little bit cooler, and you'll have a nice late summer harvest that will take you into the fall with some homegrown food. Now, I've got a few other options of seeds that you can plant in your garden in the month of July, but I want to preface this list by saying that these need to go in at the end of the month. Even so far as early August would be a considerable target for them. The first one is corn. Mini corn will mature in around 100 days. You can get one called the Early Bantam Improved. That's a sweet yellow corn that will mature in around 75 days. So if we can get that in later in the month of July, then that will time out to a harvest that lands roughly in the middle of October, which is perfect. Now, oftentimes we are experiencing really hot weather, triple-digit temperatures in the month of October, so it's not going to be a cakewalk, but nonetheless, that's a suitable target because as the days get shorter and the sun gets lower on the horizon into the fall months, the plants will grow a bit slower. So you've got to get them started, even if it's hot, and even if it's hot when you're expecting to pull them in. Others on this list would be cucumbers and squash. And with the cucumbers, you can also consider cucumber melons. These are really the same species as muskmelons or cantaloupes, but they have been grown for centuries in other countries and harvested at an immature state. They taste like cucumbers. They're nice and crunchy. There are so many different varieties to choose from. I'm a big fan of these. You can check out cucumbershop.com if you want to get your hands on some of those seeds. And when it comes to squash, we're talking about winter and summer varieties of squash, as well as pumpkins. Now, I understand if you've had trouble growing squash in the past, you can also consider some edible gourds, such as the cucuzzi, even varieties of loofah. Those will fare much better against our arch nemesis, the squash vine borer moth, which has caused so much devastation and sadness for many home gardeners, such as myself, in the past. You can try these edible gourds. They're going to taste zucchini-like, squash-like, not exactly the same, but without the pest issues. Now, believe it or not, there are some cool season crops that we can start in the month of July, but I want to be very clear that these are needing to be started indoors from seed. And we're talking about most of the brassicas, such as Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, collard greens, kale. If you want to grow those from seed, you do want to start now. You want to give them about 8 to 10 weeks to size up indoors before you start moving them out in the garden. You're going to have to go through a period of hardening them off. You don't want to just throw them out there and plant them. You need to take about a week's time to acclimate them to that warm weather because it's still going to be really hot. And you might have to hold off and keep them inside a little bit longer. So just keep that in mind. But this is a great way to get your hands on some varieties that you might not find at local nurseries. You can save your seed and grow that way. But growing these indoors does require a little bit more skill, and you have to be aware of that because you have to control the environment. You need some fans to kind of mimic the wind. You need some lights. A south-facing window or a bright window simply isn't enough. You're going to get really leggy, weak plants that just aren't going to make it. So if you're not willing to do that, just keep your eyes peeled at your local nursery. It's going to be sometime in the month of September. They'll get those starter plants in that have been grown much more easily by wholesale nurseries, and that can really skip all that work for you. But just so you know, you can get those cool season crops started right now, and you have to if you want to grow them from seed. We've touched on many great options for planting in the month of July, but I want to underscore some of the parameters which really will add up to whether or not we're successful, because this is a challenging time of year just for us humans to be outside, let alone our little plant babies that we want to sit out there and grow some food for us just so we can, get a big smile on our face. I want you to consider and look at what I like to refer to as setting the stage in the garden for optimal growth. I really think this is key to understanding how you can be successful in a regenerative organic garden. And number one is a living soil. You want to have a soil that is full of microbes and fungi. These are responsible for breaking down nutrients. They partner with plants. And if you look at it this way, we can take this analogy further. The plants are the conductors of the orchestra that is the soil food web. And here we are setting the stage for all this to go down. Another key here is a biodiverse ecosystem. What does that mean? Whether or not you're planting native species or you're just bringing in a variety of plants, flowering, herbs, flowers that are different sizes. They can host different insects, different pollinators. And with that kind of diversity, you'll create an ecosystem that will ebb and flow throughout the season, providing a habitat and a nectar source to a variety of wildlife. And from there, we just have to consider some of the basics. If our plants aren't receiving enough sunlight, they're going to be stretched, they're going to be weak, they'll be more susceptible to plant disease. Likewise, if they get too much hot sun, they just can't take it and they'll burn up. So there are some adaptive strategies that I like to employ that will help to buffer that for our plants, but you need to look at that closely in your garden, and no more so than this time of year. And crop selection, just like we've covered here, some of the key targets that you really want to specifically look at for July are going to be very important. And I also want to get into some of my climate adapted crops that I'm growing out this summer, and I'm going to touch on those in detail next. So those things add up to the essential nature of timing in our gardens when we plant things out, and we need to look at efficient watering as well, whether it's drip irrigation, oyas. We've got mulch on the soil to protect that moisture level. These are the key ingredients for optimal growth in the organic garden. Now, if we can get all of those factors dialed in, it's still not a sure thing, because we have to consider the X factor in all this, and that is climate trends. Because in Central Texas, I know it goes from one extreme to the next, and each season seems to be unique in some way. This summer, I thought we were really heading into a very hot summer, and we still may be, but it's been pouring down rain here at the beginning of July, flooding across the region, and the temperatures have been into the 80s and low 90s. So while that's not something that I would expect this time of year or in subsequent seasons, we just have to keep our eye on the ball, and if we do everything we can, we'll be giving our gardens and ourselves the best opportunity to thrive. I've been gardening here in Austin, Texas for over 18 years, and over this time I have experimented with a lot of different crops, and I have really put everything into this craft because I love being outside in nature with wildlife. I love to grow some food, and I've had this concept brewing of the champions of summer. This summer, I really dug into it, and I've got one raised bed where I've been experimenting, and I'm experimenting in a couple of ways. Number one is with the planting density, a very intensive planting here, and number two is with the crop selection. I've intentionally chosen crops that I think can really take our heat and come from other places in the world where they have similar growing conditions. So what I've got growing in this bed is a mix of loofah, sorghum, sesame, the malokia, some okra, and a special variety of basil. There are a couple of other things smattered in here. There's one amaranth that I'm growing for the first time. It's the Mayo. That one's supposed to be really beautiful. Now, I couldn't resist throwing in a couple of flowers, so I've got some cosmos and one zinnia on the corner there just to give it a little bit of a highlight. But this bed grew collard greens for me over the winter, and I didn't amend the soil. I do have drip irrigation. I have a good layer of pine straw mulch, and that's doing a lot for these plants, but I didn't drop in any compost or amendments necessarily, so I didn't give them a lot of extra. I chose crops that I thought were really tough. I gave them the best chance that I could with what I consider to be a healthy soil, and I also have given them full sun with no shade cloth. Most of my garden is under 45% Silva Shade. That's a shade cloth from shadeclothstore.com. But these selections don't have anything. They get full sun, so I wanted to see how they did. I've grown the Malokia season over season in these types of conditions, and it did really well for me. So if you're looking for something that doesn't require a lot of inputs or shade cloth, things of that nature, some of these climate adapted crops are good choices to consider. Some of the principles associated with this intensive planting is that you have those living roots in there at just the right spacing. I didn't crowd them necessarily. I gave them the recommended plant spacing per the seed package as it's recommended, but I didn't allow for any row spacing. So they're all growing in this 4 foot by 8 foot raised bed. The soil is around 12 inches deep, and they're all planted together. So that leaves less room for the sun to hit the soil, and they can kind of, clamber together there, hold out. But I was very careful in how I planted them so that the taller crops were on the north side of the bed. That's where I've got that big trellis with the loofah, and then the sorghum is on that west side. So anything, I'm assuming the sesame and the malokia and the okra are going to grow not quite as tall as the sorghum. We're on that east side, which is getting morning sun, might be a little bit shaded later in the day when the sun is really hot. So that's my experiment. You can follow along. I'll keep you updated throughout the season, and I'm really excited for this. I talked about herbs earlier in the video, but I want to highlight a few of my absolute favorites. And number one's got to be basil, because there are so many beautiful varieties that you can choose from. We've been growing the Tulsi really well through this summer, and harvesting that frequently, making some nice herbal teas. But you can also do those Italian basil pestos, and that's really great to throw on some tomatoes if you got those growing in the garden. But a few others, mint. This one, if you haven't tried mint, it's fairly easy to grow. I do recommend, like several of these options here, growing them in containers because it can be very aggressive. Also, it does like a little bit more part sun condition. It doesn't need full sun. That can be a bit too much for it. They like a little bit more moisture. So a little bit of afternoon shade or dappled light is going to be perfect for them. You could also consider eucalyptus. I have two varieties. Number one is the silver dollar. I love coming around the corner of my house and just putting my hands on this plant, getting those essential oils on my hands, rubbing it in my face. It really gives me just a moment. And you can do a lot of things with these herbs specifically, but I just enjoy them in my garden. The other one is a lemon eucalyptus. That's very similar. I've got both of those growing in containers, so I can move them around as needed, and I can protect them over the winter. I love growing herbs in containers in general because it gives them a dedicated space. Aside from some of those seasonal herbs such as basil, or even as we get into the cool season, which would include cilantro, dill, fennel, things of that nature. If you've got some Mediterranean herbs like rosemary, or sage, or thyme, oregano, these are going to be really long-lived. So you want to be very clear about and intentional about where you're putting them in your garden. Do you want to have that space for other crops? Then maybe you should consider either a dedicated raised bed or garden space for your herbs, or grow them, like I'm saying, in containers. Now I want to move on and discuss cover crops, because if you're not familiar with these, they can be really helpful to you as you grow a healthy organic soil. Also, what are you willing to do? Are you taking the summer off? Are you going on vacation? Are you out of town? Some of these cover crops can be really essential in that scenario. And also remember that many cover crops can be food crops. One of my favorite examples of this is southern peas. Southern peas come in so many different shapes and colors, flavors. They all have a unique history. I've always grown the big red ripper. That's an heirloom from Southern Virginia and North Carolina. But these plants are sprawling, and they'll come out and cover your soil, your garden pathways, keep weeds from setting in. And it's also very important to have living roots in your soil, because if you want to have a living soil, they're dependent upon those plants to carry on that function. So even if you don't want to grow crops through the heat of summer and try to grow some food, a cover crop will benefit your soil long term. Additionally, southern peas, which are legumes, offer some nitrogen fixing nodules on their roots, which may benefit future crops. Another cover crop that you might consider is buckwheat. Now this one is pretty compact in its growth, but it will sprawl and kind of lay down in the garden. It has these beautiful sprays of small white flowers that will attract all kinds of pollinators. This is a really unique plant, and I like to grow it selectively in my garden in spaces where I might have some gaps to attract some pollinators, just to cover that ground. That one can be a lot of fun, and there are multiple uses for the buckwheat groats that you can harvest from those plants. One last one that I've kind of thrown in here that I think actually makes a good cover crop is sweet potatoes. Now, whether or not you want to grow those delicious sweet potato tubers, these plants can really sprawl like the southern peas and cover the ground. They can do well in the heat and the drought. And if you do get some roots to form, those can help to open up that soil, create some spaces for biology to inhabit, loosen that soil for you. And whether or not you harvest those tubers to eat, you've got a good cover crop there for this time of year. So just take that into consideration based on what you're willing to do, what you have going on in your garden. And remember that healthy soil is dependent upon plants. So whether or not you choose to grow some of the fall selections that I pointed out earlier, or you're just going to take a break, it's very important that we keep something growing in our gardens, because this is part of setting the stage as it relates to our soil health, but also the garden ecosystem that we want to foster. And that's why I want to touch on gardening for joy, because even if you've had failure, or you just haven't had the resources to put into your garden, or the time, or many things in life can interfere with this practice, right? And I'm the same way. I make mistakes, I fail each season, and also I have critters sometimes that come up and mess up my plants. That's why it's important to emphasize the value of native species. One of my favorites that I have growing in my front yard is the Texas kidneywood. This is a shrub or a small tree, and it flowers seasonally. You get so much biodiversity around those. It's got a beautiful scent, and it's really tough. I don't water it. I don't really give it a lot of care. It just knows how to survive in our region. Others that I really love are the rock rose. This is a beautiful hibiscus-like flower, and it will put on a show in the middle of summer. When it's good and ready, it doesn't need much from me. It will spread from seed really kind of aggressively, so maybe there's too much of a good thing there, but it's still one of my favorites. I also really enjoy the heartleaf skullcap. It's got a lot of, fuzzy texture to the leaves. It's got a beautiful, really small orchid-like flower. These just really help me dream in the garden, give me a sense of wonder, give me some tactile sensation to gravitate to. So whether or not I'm growing some herbs or some vegetables, I can be enriched by these native plants, which also foster habitat for wildlife, which is essential to my garden ecosystem. I had a pretty hectic start to the spring season here in my home garden, and I just didn't get things in on time. That's always the case. Timing is so critical, and that's why I've included it in that, setting the stage for the garden chart. But one of the things that I committed myself to was growing some beautiful flowers. So alongside of the natives, I've got some annual selections that I really love. Number one is giant zinnias. These always have so much beauty. They're great cut flowers. I'll see butterflies and hummingbirds coming to visit them for a drink. And they really give me something to savor throughout the season, whether or not I've gotten things in successfully and they're fruiting for me. Whatever happens, there's usually a handful of these annual flowers, also including celosia, cosmos, and hibiscus. Hibiscus is one that I always really love. I've got a hardy hibiscus growing in a big pot, and it started blooming about 2 weeks ago. This really beautiful pink color. I've got a tropical hibiscus that I've been overwintering for the past couple of winters. I'm waiting for that one to start flowering. And this season, I came back around to one of my old favorites, which is the Mexican sunflower, also known as Tithonia. I've got one of these growing in one of my 17-inch tall Vago beds. There's a single stake next to the center of this main stalk on this plant, giving it a little bit of support, and it has just been blooming like crazy. I've been giving it a little bit of water every morning. That gives me a sense of communion with my garden. I get out here to see things. So many beautiful blooms. The color is really off the charts in my opinion, and this is where I've really seen a lot of action. Hummingbirds literally a few feet away from my face, getting some sips of nectar, and butterflies. They just really gravitate towards this plant. So I want to encourage you to grow a garden that brings you joy. You can attract wildlife, you can create cut flower arrangements, and you can manifest a kaleidoscope of beauty all season long. You don't sound that good. You don't sound that good, Blackburn. Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel, like this video, and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own food. Keep it organic.